Okay, so what did the Romans think of the Christians? We kind of know what they thought of the Jews. Some of them liked them, some of them thought they were trying to start a revolution and they didn't like that. But how about the Christians? Well, Christians became this very popular underground movement. It wasn't something you were supposed to do. The Romans found them very weird and subversive because, like the Jews, they didn't sacrifice to the emperor. The emperor was worshipped as a god. Christians said, "Nuh-uh, I'm not going to do that. Not going to let it happen. Not going to sacrifice to the emperor. I'm just only going to sacrifice to God." Now, the Jews had been given an exemption for this, but the Christians seemed just weirder than the Jews to the Romans. They didn't have the Jewish way of life. Which the Romans thought that was cool, the dietary code and the monotheistic, well, the monotheism is still there, but the dietary code and the circumcision and all that. Now Christians are saying, oh, you don't have to have any of that, but we're still not going to sacrifice to the emperor. Well, you can imagine how the emperor felt about that. He thought it was kind of a rude move on their part. And it was just feared that the Christians were a bunch of weirdos, dangerous weirdos maybe, because they were still talking about revolution. They're talking about the end of the empire, stuff like that. And so the Roman government didn't let Christians get together, but they did it anyway. They snuck together and met in secret, which made them feel even more subversive to the emperors. And there was a feeling like they were just doing some nefarious stuff. A lot of rumors spread. For instance, there was a belief, I kid you not, that Christians ate dead babies. It was a whole thing that Christians would do these cannibalistic rituals on babies who had died in miscarriage and things like that. It was wild. And maybe this is a misinterpretation of the tradition of Jesus saying, this is my body, this is my blood. The Romans didn't get that they were talking about wine and bread, not actual human flesh. And the Christians talked about love a lot. The Romans thought that they were having secret orgies. So these are the kind of stereotypes that were spread around. And basically, for a period of about 200 years, the Christian churches were growing somewhat secretively, but they were made into scapegoats because in the 200s, the empire started to have a lot of crises. The emperors started to lose control of power, things got a lot less stable, and so some people felt that they had offended the gods in some way. And maybe the way that they had offended the gods was by letting these Christians roam around every place doing what they wanted. So Christians were very often persecuted, and especially at certain times they were persecuted more when people were panicking. So they made a scapegoat. One of the ways that they were persecuted was execution. There was another tradition in Rome, in addition to crucifixion, that one way that they would kill their criminals was to have them fight lions and things in the arena. So this was something that happened to a lot of Christians. A Christian would refuse to worship the emperor and then would be taken into the Colosseum and be forced to fight a lion with a tiny little dagger. So this served two purposes for the Romans. It was entertaining for people who liked that sort of thing, and it was a way to get rid of the criminals and to make a big show of it and to humiliate them. But the weird thing for the Romans was that the Christians welcomed this. The Christians would make a big thing of it, and they said, look, if I make a big show of I'm Christian and I am going to go to my death for God, then A, I'm right with God, and B, other people will see my example and come to be Christian too. So the Christians became witnesses to God by doing this. And the word for that in Greek is martyrs. So we think of a martyr as someone who sacrifices himself for a particular cause. That's what these Christians were doing. And it weirded the Romans out even further. So the Christians had to, like I said, communicate in secret. One of the ways they did this was through the word ichthyes. So the word ichthyes is the Greek word for fish. So sometimes they wouldn't even say ichthyes. They would just draw a fish shape on the wall. You still see these on license plates and car bumpers today, these fish shapes. And it's a sign that whoever has it is a Christian, but it's not in secret so much anymore. But what ichthyes is an acronym that stands for Jesus Christus huios theou soter. no, sorry, Jesus Christus Theou Huios Soter. So Jesus Christ, Son of God, Savior, or Jesus Christ, Son of God, is Savior. You can drop the is in Greek. This is a way to communicate you're Christian without the Roman authorities catching on. Just draw a fish or write the word fish. And this worked well because Christianity was associated with fish. Jesus had fed people from fish, and he had made some of his original disciples his disciples when they were fishermen. So that was kind of cool. And he said, I will make you fishers of men. So like they were getting people on their side, just like they were fishing for fish. So there were some connections there. And one of the ways that Christianity spread was these biographical accounts of people who had sacrificed themselves and been martyrs. One of them is Perpetua. I won't go into every detail with Perpetua's story, but you can read more of it if you want. But Perpetua basically refused to worship the emperor. And this is a young woman, she's an adolescent. She might be a teenager or 20-something, and she has a small child and her son, and she lives with her father. And her father does not want her to be a Christian, but she's going to be a Christian, and she's willing to die for her beliefs. And her father tells her, and the authorities tell her, just make a sacrifice for the emperors and we can be done with all this. And she says, no, I am a Christian, I refuse. And the account of Perpetua says that she was happy with her decision. Even though she had a son who she was leaving behind, she was going to be willing to sacrifice herself for her religion and for God. And so she goes and she's taken into the arena and she tells as much of the story as she can. And then another person who was there with her takes up the story from there. She goes into the arena and she lets the lions come and attack her. And she is totally willing to do that. And there's a miracle that her body is left, even though she's killed, her body is not destroyed. She is not torn in her clothes. So God is watching over her and letting her make this sacrifice. So she gets together with some other Christians, and she has a vision of her dead brother in heaven and her helping him get to heaven by doing this. And all this stuff is going on. And so people would pass around these accounts of, look, this is what the martyrs have done for us, and this is why we're Christians. And this helped Christianity spread and helped people understand why someone would go and sacrifice themselves in an arena to go fight lions because they were doing it for God. And very frequently, the places where these martyrs were buried were, tiny underground places or catacombs that weren't like real honored graves. But these graves became churches and holy sites because the people who made these sacrifices became saints. So people would meet at these graves to venerate the saints and to worship God in secret, because you had to be in secret. And then they became some of the first churches. And you see some of the first images of Jesus in there. Already they're kind of depicting him as more white. And then later on, you see much more beautiful and illuminated images of Jesus that aren't these sort of small, tiny drawings on catacomb walls. And that's because after a certain point, Jesus and Christianity went way more mainstream. And how did this happen? Well, it all had to do with a guy named Constantine. Let's see. Should I go into Gnosticism? Yeah, I might as well. In the early church, there were a lot of different versions. So the church wasn't one unified organization at first. It was a lot of different people doing a lot of different things and having a lot of different interpretations of what the religion was. And the Gnostics were more detached from an organized church. They were people who preferred to meet individually in smaller groups and didn't really believe that one authority should tell them what to do, that there shouldn't be bishops and popes and things like that for the church. So they weren't big believers in that. They were more thinking about the individual prayer and individual relationship to God. But what's pretty wild about them is that they had some unique beliefs. They believed that the god of Judaism had been a false god, who they called Yaldabaoth. Yaldabaoth is called the demiurge, which means craftsman. he thinks he created the universe, but he didn't really. He just created sort of physical things, but not spiritual things. He created the false things and the bad things in the world, and we are kind of escaping his prison to get to the true God. And there's a kind of angel called Sophia, whose name means wisdom, and wisdom can show us the way to the true God. And the Gnostics focused on gnosis, which was a sort of special inner knowledge. So we connect with God to ourselves, and we use meditation, and we reject the idea of sort of these hierarchies in these churches. So that was pretty different, but I want to stress that it wasn't necessarily a heresy per se. It only was called heresy later on when the church became more official and more powerful. But basically what happened is that the church sort of became more popular over time. And maybe one of the reasons for this is that the church sort of broke less with Judaism, because this Gnosticism was its own thing and kind of going on a pretty sharp turn if you're going to say that the God of Judaism was a false god. That's pretty different. And so maybe that was one reason why the bishops in the churches were able to succeed where Gnosticism was not. But another might be that the bishops had more, they had more organization, they had more power and things like that. But if you ever hear about the Gnostic Gospels, this is what people are talking about. Okay, so let's talk about Emperor Constantine. Emperor Constantine was an emperor who came along at a very important time in Roman history because he legalized Christianity. He decided that Christianity should be legal and people should be allowed to practice it. And not only that, he kind of started to make it the official religion of Rome. So here's a statue of Constantine, the pieces of it anyway. Take a look at him right here. What sort of images are we seeing here? We've got him looking up to the sky, and we've also got him pointing up to the sky, as if to say, think about who's up in the sky. Think about God. And Constantine did some other things as well. For instance, he noticed that Rome wasn't working as well as a capital. So he moved the capital of Rome much further east. He took a city called Byzantium and he renamed it Constantinople. And Constantinople became his outpost and was much nearer the Greek part of the world and much nearer Jerusalem and the things that he cared about. So he made that a real emphasis. And he had that statue there in his city, which, Constantinople just means city of Constantine, Constantinopolis. And he built a column to commemorate his arrival and to commemorate the refounding of the city as his city, which was, of course, going to be a city for a new kind of Roman Empire where Christianity was going to be much more popular. And part of the reason for this is he was fighting a civil war against other people who wanted to be emperor. And the victory, the story goes that Constantine was about to do the final battle to take over Rome and to finally take over the empire. And this was the Battle of the Milvian Bridge versus a guy named Maxentius. One of the first times in Roman history that an emperor had to fight to take over the city of Rome. And Constantine had a dream or a vision, and he saw like a kind of cross in the sky. And he heard the voice of God, and the voice of God said, "In this sign shall you conquer." So if you believe in God, basically, you will win your battle and become emperor. So no wonder Constantine had a special relationship with Christianity after that. Some people say that the sign was a cross. Other people say it's a special symbol that you see in churches sometimes, which is called a chi rho, which has the first two letters of Jesus' name, and sometimes three letters, the k from and the r from Christ. And Constantine would put symbols like the chi rho on his coins. So Constantine was showing the signs of his relationship to God. But I think we're running out of time here, so we'll do a little bit more Constantine in the next video, and we'll talk about how the empire changed because of this one special emperor.